I'm Richard Swanson. I'm a retired rheumatologist. As a rheumatologist, I didn't really deal with dementia, but I saw patients who had rheumatologic diseases who had dementia. So I'm aware of this, but I'm also very much aware that dementia in its multiple forms is very common in the country today. And what we're going to be talking about today is not so much the demented patient, but how to help them. And Brian Hauenstein is agreed to talk with us. Brian is a man of multiple talents. He graduated from Aquinas College. He spent time in Japan doing missionary work. He's been a marketing expert for a number of other big companies in the area. He now has a company called Oasis Senior Advisors, who talks to people and helps them deal with people with patients with dementia. So Brian has agreed to talk with us today. We'll get through more into about Brian's past and his illustrious family in Grand Rapids as we go along. So I am not going to delay any longer, but turn this over to Brian Hauenstein and say thank you from HASP, and please ask questions as you have them for the people out there. And thank you for coming today. Brian, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you for the invite, and thank you to Ian for helping to get things off on a good foot here and right on time. I like that. I like that about this organization already, on time. That's great. So I'm going to talk just a little bit more about myself and why I'm here today and how it is that Richard became interested in having me as a speaker here. So Oasis Senior Advisors is an organization that is a franchise. We're based out of Bonita Springs, Florida, but we have well over 100 franchisees operating in DMAs or metropolitan areas across the country. I actually do not represent Holland or the west side of the state. I actually represent Grand Rapids, so namely Kent County. So if you ever need care or advice in this area, you're certainly welcome to give me a call. I am the president of the Senior Care Coalition. The Senior Care Coalition was developed by me about 4 years ago and includes about 20 organizations that all focus on our senior population. And we do so under the Grand Rapids Catholic Diocese. So we're really become sort of an extension of the Catholic Church here in Kent County for those that are seeking help. Everything from priests to lay people and then people of other denominations. So we really help everybody. I'm also the founder of the Senior Advocacy Council, which is similarly created but non-denominational and operates much like a B&I group. So we help each other's businesses and we refer to each other. And then I am also on the board of the St. Mary's Foundation here with Trinity Health. And that brings me into close contact, obviously, with the Hauenstein Center of Neurology of Grand Rapids campus. So I'm an ambassador, operating as an ambassador there, and obviously with my business, I interact quite a bit with the physicians on the team there. Another passion of mine, and this all ties into our senior population, right, is our veteran heroes. I am a board member of the Michigan Heroes Museum in Frankenmuth. And in fact, we'll be hosting the first ever West Michigan area event this coming Veterans Day in Grand Rapids at the JW Marriott. Over 800 people, mostly veterans, involved with that, but we're celebrating their life, their legacy, and we hope that you can look into that and be a part of that. And then most recently, I was selected to be on the Holland Home Strategic Planning Committee. That just went through last week, and I think they're grooming me for their board position over there. So just a little context for you. So And then also the designation, you may have seen underneath my name there, Certified Senior Advisor, probably not a credential that you're familiar with, but we're required to go through, a volume of text in regards to an understanding, not only just dementia, but, the financial aspects of aging, the care needs, everything from, how to care for somebody with an aging problem to housing and a whole array of services. So I'll get into that in a little bit too. And as Dr. Swanson said, so as we go through this, I would really like people to ask questions versus saving them to the end. And any kind of question is going to be a good question. So feel free to throw anything at me. So today we're going to go over these key quality of life improvements. We're going to talk about functional changes. We're going to talk about cognitive and preventative measures, and we're going to talk about housing and services. And dementia really falls within that letter B there. And really, this is, the landscape of senior care has changed dramatically. I think most of you, if I can remember it, certainly all of you can remember the days when skilled nursing was really our choice, right? And we know what that looks like, and we all sort of thought, boy, I really don't want to end up in skilled nursing. So there are so many more choices today, and such a better caring society that has evolved over the last 30 to 40 years. I'm going to share some of that with you. So let's talk about sort of the life phases that we go through. In our 40s and 50s, our midlife evaluation, we're really, trying to figure out, how do we be creative, and how do we get that creative expression out there? And it's intensified by stress or quest, a desire to create a meaning in our life. Who are we? We're trying to sort of define ourselves as a human being and how we're going to be remembered. And then we get into our 60s, and with freedom from retirement, we're really trying to try something new, right? We're trying to figure out, what does that next phase of our life look like? Are we going to be, a downhill skier, or are we going to maybe not do something that's not so risky on our bodies, and maybe be a writer or whatever it is? It's sort of that second run at either a career or a passion that we want to define our whole lives. And then in our 70s, and of course, obviously, people fall outside of these parameters. I'll be talking about that in a bit, but this is sort of how it was summed up by Gene Cohen. In our 70s, older adults see themselves in the role as the keepers of the culture. Creative focus on autobiography, storytelling, philanthropy. As an example, I've been involved with philanthropy ever since I left my last career, which was about 5 years ago. So I kind of slipped into philanthropy at 50. Community activism, volunteerism, and other activities of giving back. Individuals may have a creative burst during which this time they feel unfinished or unfulfilled dreams need to be realized, right? So this is a time for you to kind of reflect and go, how do I fill in the gaps of my life, the things I haven't done, the things that are going to really make me feel like I have lived a full life. And then, of course, the encore years. This is when creative expression is all about making a lasting and final statement of finished or unfinished business, or finishing unfinished business. And so I'm going to be talking about some examples of folks like this right in our own backyard in a bit here. Let's talk first about the functional changes with aging that we all go through. Because declines are different for everyone, and we see this. People age at different levels, different speeds of aging. My wife and I were just watching a movie last night, Land, that had the actress in it from Forrest Gump, and I said, that's the same actress. And she said, there's no way. It couldn't be, that was only 20 years ago. Well, she did the research and found out it was the same actress. And, some of us just don't age as well as others. Physically, we get more wrinkles or whatever, that it doesn't put us all on the same playing field in a lot of ways. But a lot of that can be, based on, capabilities and past experiences. If we were out in the sun a lot and we've got a lot of sun on our skin, we tend to, our skin doesn't age as well as if we were someone that stayed in or used lotion more aggressively. So we need to reinvent your passions as long as you're able to do them. So, whatever that passion is, and may need to sort of reinvent what that thing is that you used to do that you can no longer do, right? So maybe you used to be, I use the example of a downhill skier. Maybe your body just can't take downhill skiing anymore, but boy, you'd love to be in the environment. And so maybe volunteering at a ski resort to, pass out the skis or something to that effect would fulfill that for you, because you can still engage in a dialogue with those that are passionate about it, and you have a knowledge. Another example I give here is, travel. I used to be a kind of a travel nut. I would be all over the world. I kind of, check off the continents that I'm on. I climbed Kilimanjaro, I climbed Mount Fuji, and visited just about every country in Europe and South America and Africa. But as my body ages and my desire for those things kind of change, it's time for me to kind of reinvent those things too. So now it maybe becomes storytelling, something along those lines, or getting interested in a cuisine from those countries that I enjoyed visiting perhaps the most. Pass on your knowledge to other people. They want to learn about them, right? And it's good for you to sort of talk about those things. Obviously, anytime you're using your brain, you're exercising your brain, you're taking it out for a walk, so to speak. So certainly find ways to use those passions and pass them on to other groups or technologies like I'm doing today. And I suspect that this group does that. I've spoken to, you're probably all familiar with the OLLI group and at Aquinas College, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. I've spoken there a few times. I think I have a picture of them in here. So cognitive changes with aging. Let's talk about that for a moment. Not all develop a dementia. This is really important for us to hit on, and I'll be talking about this more in depth in the future. I think we have a tendency as a culture to feel as though if we forget where we left the keys, or if it's a sort of a small progression of forgetting things, that, oh boy, I've got dementia. And the funny thing most people say is, I've got Alzheimer's. Well, we're going to debunk that in a little bit too. A lot of that's just, senility. And like I said, I mentioned earlier, take your mind out for a walk, like constantly, do things with your mind. My grandfather was a great one for reading books, and people were always giving him books, and he spent a great amount of time reading newspapers and books all the time. He was very knowledgeable about current affairs. Causes of memory loss can be issues of things that happen within your control, such as anxiety, dehydration, depression, infections, medication side effects, poor nutrition, psychological stress, substance abuse, and thyroid imbalance. So there's all kinds of things that are within your control that you can sort of keep from escalating loss of memory, right? I mean, I'm sure all of us in here, if we were to have 5 or 6 drinks, we probably wouldn't be able to remember like we did when we started, right? So we certainly can control that. And then we talked about, socializing. Socializing can be such an important part. I'm not going to sing to the choir today, because this certainly is an audience of people that recognizes the importance of participating and being out there and learning. This bottom right picture was one that I had taken at Ollie, and I'm not going to do that today because I don't have the access to the full screen of folks, but that was just to make a point there. And then, let's talk a little bit about, where we are in the 21st century. You see the picture over on the left there of the gal talking to probably her granddaughter on FaceTime or some sort of medium that allows you to visually interact with somebody. 20 years ago, that wasn't there, right? And I can tell you that has made a tremendous difference for not only our senior population, but really everyone. I have a daughter that she graduated Grand Valley several years ago and moved to Tokyo, Japan. So if you remember what happened several years ago, this was February 28th of 20 that she moved over. And it was just 2 weeks later that everybody was on lockdown pretty much across the globe. And so I didn't have the ability to visit my daughter for 3 years. In fact, 3 years and 3 months, she came back home for the first time. And FaceTime is what saved us. We would do, group FaceTimes with friends and her and the whole family. And we found creative ways to play games together. It doesn't have to be a hello, how are you doing today kind of message, but you can interact in a lot of different ways using a medium like that. I think it's just incredibly important and was a big change in terms of how people engage. And I'll give you another example. I have a daughter that's a CNA, certified nurse assistant at Story Point here in Rockford. And she has worked in the memory care unit for about 5 years now. She has one particular patient of theirs has a severe dementia. I think it's a frontal lobe dementia based on what I've heard from her. But her family has a direct link through a system into her room. So at any time, she can call them up or they can call her up and say, hey, morning, Mom, how are you? What's going on today? And actually this frontal lobe dementia prevents her from speaking. So she mumbles a lot of words and can't get things out clearly, but she feels that love from that family just by having them on screen. It's really powerful. I've kind of beat this horse to death, but I just can't stress the importance of utilizing this new technology and finding ways to get help from others to get hooked up on it. Maximizing cognitive function, another way to do that is just exercise, right? Exercising your brain is exercising your body. So stay engaged in promoting that healthy body. There's lots of safe ways to do it. Yoga, probably the most safe way out there. You're not gonna break a hip or break an arm or something if you're doing yoga. But there's just so many ways. Kind of pick that thing that's the right thing for you, but stay active, stay moving. Sedentary is just that can be the death of all of us. So avoid that. All right, maintain an emotional well-being by being more of what you've always wanted to be, right? So stretch your knowledge. When you retire, you're not done. You need to figure out ways to continue to stretch and mold your mind. In most of the cases, you spent a career life tied to a desk or an environment that didn't promote good health. So now is your time to get out and move and figure out ways to take what you've learned and create an action behind them. I want to tell you, a couple life stories here, friends, family, that I just think are so important. This photo actually was taken, let's see, the year would have been 1993. I believe. And on the left, the far left, was a gentleman that I had met in 1989 when I lived for a summer in Dublin, Ireland, just south of Dublin, Dunleary. And I stayed with his cousin, and he was introduced to me because he had just recently retired RTE, that's the radio television programming in Ireland, as a chief editor. And he was sort of looking for something to do. And his cousin said, "Hey, I got this American over here, and maybe you guys could spend a little time together." So that summer, he and I spent quite a bit of time together. Extremely knowledgeable, a huge fan of James Joyce, and knew everything about James Joyce. Educated me on these things. But he had lost his wife to cancer several years earlier. And so he had a lot of time, and he had a lot of passion for learning. Went back to college and started traveling all over the world, learned Spanish at the University of Dublin, and took those skills to Spain every year. This was him visiting us in East Grand Rapids. He and I went up to Mackinac Island. And of course, we stopped along the way to kind of show him the various places, Sleeping Bear Dunes and so forth. And there was nothing he wouldn't do. And I think he was probably, at this point, he was maybe 65 to 70, maybe in that range. And I said, "Do you want to rent some bikes and just kind of ride the outskirts of the island? Fairly benign sort of exercise, right? It's pretty flat." And he said, "Yeah, let's do that." And so we got the bikes. And I said, knowing he's a historian, I said, "Hey, we've got, there's this fort up on the top of the island and fort ruins. Do you want to see that?" "Yeah, let's do that. Let's take the bikes," he says. So we take the bikes, past the Grand Hotel. And we took them all the way up there. And then he wanted to go ride on a trail, like a little sort of path through the woods. Well, we did that. Well, if you've ever been up there, it's very hilly, and he went flying down this hill, flew off his bike, and I thought he was gonna, I thought we were in real trouble. Well, he got up and he shook it off. I think he's, the thing is, if you continue exercising and you're not sedentary, you can you'd be surprised what your body can take. I guess my point with him is that, he lived a life like he wasn't 65 to 70. At that point, he was stretching himself. Now, when he got home, he said, "Yeah, I spent a couple weeks, kind of licking my wounds and getting over the pain of doing all that." But he just thoroughly enjoyed it, and we enjoyed our time together. And sad story about him was that he had a stroke about 10 years later, and ended up in a skilled nursing facility in Dublin, and lived out his life there for like 13 years. He died in his 90s just a couple of years ago. But you know what? He lived. I mean, he lived well, right? And that's my point, is that he did all he could with the time that he had, not knowing that he was going to have that stroke that was going to leave him debilitated. So this guy is my favorite story to talk about, because he was my late grandfather, Colonel Ralph Hauenstein. You heard me talk about him earlier. Very extremely very knowledgeable, very philanthropic here in Grand Rapids and throughout West Michigan. He was Eisenhower's chief of intelligence in World War II. So if you hear about Wild Bill Donovan, and you hear about spies and double agents and agents, he sort of had control of the agents and double agents on the European theater of operations, was instrumental in helping planning of D-Day and the deception plot there that led us to believe, or led the Germans to believe, that we were going to land at Calais versus Normandy, as we did, and probably save thousands of lives. He was a war hero to the nth degree. He wrote, in his 90s, he wrote the book that's in front of you here. Intelligence Was My Line. He co-authored it. with a gentleman from the CIA, retired gentleman, that was a curator for the Gettysburg Museum. And, it was an opportunity for him to sort of retrospectively tell his story to the degree that he could, because we all know that he died with many secrets, but it was such a healing process for him to go through and talk about things that had happened that none of us were aware of. He was the first officer into Dachau prison camp, and I never knew this until he was in his 90s to talk about this, and it was truly incredibly emotional for him to have a conversation about it. But it sort of healed him in a lot of ways. And I think it's just so important for us to get out there, tell your story, no matter what that story is, find a way to do it. If you're a writer, writing a story is great. If you're not, get out and tell people about it. And that can look like a presentation like this, or it can look like having lunch with somebody. Richard and I sit down and have a lunch, which we did actually a few months ago, and talk about our stories. This is another one, and the dots are connected here actually, because John Van Laar, born in Holland, Michigan, he was the president of my grandfather's company. John and I have developed a friendship, a relationship here over the last few years, and I had only heard his name in passing, but we've gone on speaking engagements. We were on C-SPAN together, talking about my grandfather and his life and legacy. John just wrote this book, and I want to say he's 92 now. Let's see here. No, he's 90. He was born, in fact, I'll read this quick passage because it'll connect to many of you in his new book here. The earliest I can remember my youth was probably about when I was 3 to 4 years old. I was born in Holland, Michigan on June 14th, 1932. My dad was a minister in Prospect Park Christian Reformed Church, and we lived in a big white house called the Parsonage at 6 East 24th Street. You probably all know where that is. I don't know where that is. I had a sister, Myrtle, who was 7 years older than me. By the way, the house is now a bed and breakfast. There was a lot of love in our house, and I recall clearly that I always felt secure and wanted. We didn't have much money, but there was always food and a warm house and a great bed. And so this guy, he went through and told his story from his earliest days. He moved out to the East Coast, came back to West Michigan, Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids, obviously, and his experiences with working for Warner Lahara, my grandfather's company, and some great loving stories about my grandfather. But it doesn't have to be on the bestseller list, right? He was getting all this out at 90 years old, out of his head, and onto the pages. I don't think he cared whether he gave away, 5 books or 50 books. In fact, I think he said he only printed up like 20 of them, and then he had to go back to print because people kept asking him for them. So it's a beautiful way to share your story, your life, your legacy. All right, so let's talk about some other longevity suggestions. Stay mentally active with games and brain teasers. There's all kinds of, we all have a phone, a device now that we can refer to that can load up with apps, and you can do all kinds of things without even leaving your home to challenge your brain and your abilities. Take on new activities or a new hobby. Volunteer in your local, everybody's looking for volunteers. West Michigan is probably one of the best places to volunteer. I'm an active member of my Grand Rapids Rotary, and every week we get a list of at least 3 or 4 things that we can do in the coming weeks to volunteer our time. Eat healthy foods such as fruits and vegetables and fish. can't say that enough, that, eating healthy is going to lead to a healthier brain and a healthier body long term. This is a shocker, right? Limit alcohol and smoking. Yeah, and that's true. Limit smoking. I can't believe we're actually saying that, but um, they do suggest that you just limit these things. If you're not all in on something, you're probably going to end up living better, right? If you're an extremist in anything, it tends to shorten your life. Prevent head trauma from falls, right? So don't do anything that's gonna, if your gait is not well, if your balance is not well, then don't do things that are going to require you to be careful about those things. And then connect with a young person. I mentioned to you earlier that I've had this great friend from Dublin, Ireland. I've had a lot of older people as friends ever since I was, realistically a teenager. So reach out to a younger person. They might be able to even fix your iPad or your iPhone, right? while you're visiting with them, because they seem to be extremely knowledgeable about these things. Right? You agree with me on that, Rich?
Absolutely. I'm a Luddite when it comes to those things.
Yeah. We just went to my mom's house. She moved to Canadian Lakes, and I brought my son with me. And of course, Mom had all these projects in the backyard. We're cutting trees and so forth. And we get in the house, and she says, "Well, gosh, I have not been on the internet in so long. I don't know what, passwords and this and that." You get 5 minutes later, my son's working on her computer trying to figure out what's going on. Free help. All right, so let's talk about dementia and neurocognitive disorders. I know this is a big part of this topic today. So, broad terms for declines in mental ability, really not a normal sign of aging, right? This is, dementia. I think I said this earlier, but people tend to think that they have dementia if they're just losing a little bit of their memory, but that's really not in most cases what's happening. And then the other one, really, Alzheimer's is to dementia as Band-Aid is to bandages, right? I think there's a huge misuse of the term Alzheimer's. And hold on just one second. I need to move something on my screen because it's covering. The fact is that Alzheimer's actually is the #1 dementia, accounting for about 60 to 80% of all dementias. It tends to be, progressive and gradually caused by multiple underlying factors and buildup of plaques and tangles in the neurons. The only two treatable forms of dementia, like diagnoses, are normal pressure hydrocephalus, say that 3 times fast, caused by injury or bleeding on the brain, and then delirium, which I tend with a lot of my clients, and of course I'm not a physician, but I sort of can pre-diagnose delirium, which is caused by some sort of toxicity to the body. When you've got somebody that's taking a lot of different medications, they don't even know what, you see this physician, they prescribe this medication, another one. They're supposed to be making sure that these don't interact, but that doesn't always happen. And then if you layer on somebody who likes their alcohol or is a bit of an alcoholic, now you have the makings of some real delirium, which can look an awful lot like a dementia, okay? The irreversible forms of dementia, the ones that we all think we have, Alzheimer's, again, being #1 on the list. We tend to say, he or she had Alzheimer's, and I'm not sure that, if it was a neurologist that was diagnosing, they probably wouldn't use that quite as freely, but most physicians will jump to that conclusion. The truth is that you don't really know if it's Alzheimer's until you do an autopsy of the brain after someone passes. But there are certain signs that can kind of lean that way. The next one up is about 15 to 20% of those dementias, the irreversible dementias, and that's VCI, or vascular cognitive impairment. This is caused by really small strokes, but not all strokes lead to this form of dementia. And then third up on the list, and quite a bit further down, making up a much smaller portion of remaining dementias, is Lewy body, which tends to be a lot less understood of the dementias, but often leads to visual hallucinations, periods of reduced responsiveness, and fluctuating cognitive function. I hear of this one quite a bit actually in my clients, the hallucination bit, and I think a lot of people tend to jump again to it's Lewy body, but delirium can cause that as well. So, and then Parkinson's, which is a loss of dopamine causing movement problems, similar to Lewy body dementia, causing mild cognitive impairment with slower reaction times. Dementia actually only exists in about 1/3 of all Parkinson's diagnosed patients. Not sure if everybody's aware of that. And then lastly, the frontotemporal lobe. This is really caused by cell damage that impacts planning, judgment, emotions, speaking, comprehension, and some movements. So that, again, think of the story I shared with you earlier about my daughter's patient at Story Point. Just can't get the words out, really struggling to say what she means. Occasionally she'll say, "I love you," but that's pretty much the extent of what she can communicate. So dementia treatments. It's important, I think, first off, to note that there are no cures. There's a lot of work being done in this, and everybody here's, I'm sure, familiar with the Alzheimer's Association and all of the money that gets poured in there. A lot of research is done, and a lot of money put behind research to try and figure out how can we reverse Alzheimer's and other dementias. But nothing really exists today on that front. Medications are also are prescribed to deal with symptoms and curb the progression of the disease. But when it comes to if this is a spouse that you're going through these challenging situations with, I would first of all recommend that you do see a neurologist and that you understand what type of dementia it is so you can treat it properly. But I think the best advice that I can give you are these next bullet points here. If you are a spouse that's dealing with this with your own spouse, there are some things that I can suggest. First off is monitoring their personal comfort. So if they appear as though they're uncomfortable for some reason, and it's important to sort of look at their surroundings and be their eyes and ears for what might be bothering them, a loud noise, or maybe they sat on a book or something when they sat down, but they just can't communicate that to you. So you are you become their eyes and ears, and that's important. Avoid confrontation. Agitation tends to be one of those factors that we see most frequently with a dementia patient. And it's because, they can't really communicate like they used to. They can't grab that thing that they're thinking of, or it's gone in a split second. and that just causes them frustration. So, you just want to be very cognizant of when they're agitated about something, just helping to console them and not be confrontational about whatever that item is that they're concerned about. Redirect attention. My daughter talks about this all the time in her business, but and I think the best example of that for people that are in a memory care unit is showering. They don't know the last time they took a shower. They don't feel like taking a shower. And so the way not to approach that is to say, hey, do you want to take a shower? People that suffer dementias tend to not like water on them, on their face. And so they're always going to say no. And so walking up to them and asking the question, you're always going to get the no answer, rather than saying, hey, Marge, let's go take a shower. It's time. And then there's kind of like no, I mean, they could certainly, argue with that statement, but, you can maybe go off and do something for a minute, come back and try the same approach. That tends to work. And I know it works very well for my daughter. It doesn't, I'm sure it helps that she's cute and very sweet too, but that all helps. Create a calm environment. So every dementia person I've ever known in my family does not like a family reunion where you've got, kids running around, lots of noise, just complete chaos. It drove my grandma crazy. I remember her saying, who are all these people? Why are they here? And I just want to go home, and that sort of thing. So, if it's Christmas time, maybe you say, well, rather than everybody getting together, maybe each family stops over at grandma's house, one at a time, kind of thing. Just things change over time, right? I know a lot of people hate change, but that you definitely have to do that, and you certainly have to treat somebody with dementia differently than what they used to be treated like. Allow for adequate rest. You might not think that for somebody with dementia, this presentation would be incredibly exhausting, because they're using their brain, they're trying to figure out, what are you talking about, jumping from one sort of subject to the next. That is it's not just about the physical exhaustion. It can be about mental exhaustion as well. So allow them the adequate time to rest, and that can be, truly taking, cat naps throughout the day. Acknowledge their requests. It's so easy to say, well, he can't go bowling, because he just wouldn't be able to physically handle that. Well, it's important to sort of talk that through that with them. Okay, just rather than ignoring the fact that they said it, because they'll get hung up on that one thing. I want to go bowling. I want to go bowling. I want to go, and just keep going until you acknowledge it at a minimum, right? You don't necessarily have to go bowling, but you have to figure out how to talk your way through those things. And then explore various solutions to whatever that hurdle is. There always tends to be, another way around things. So just be creative and lean on others. Do we have any questions at this point? Everybody's been pretty quiet. Nothing yet. Ian, anything in the chat window?
No question in the chat window, Brian.
Okay, keep plugging along here. You might have heard of sundowning or sundowners. This is a state of confusion for people that do suffer from dementia that occurs in the evening, late afternoon, and spanning into the night. And a lot of this really comes from, we think, just exhaustion of the day. Again, they're kind of worn out, and they're just, it's like almost like a child, when a child runs around all day, and then at the end of the night they're kind of crabby, and they don't want to do what you tell them to do. So there's probably not a whole lot of difference between the two. Sundowning can cause a variety of behaviors such as confusion, anxiety, aggression, or ignoring directions. Some of those things that we talked about earlier, that we have to figure out, how are we going to help them through it, right? So what are some of the things that you can do to avoid if somebody's going through sundowning? Try to get them out into the sunlight. Have sunlight activities. Sun is good for you. Vitamin D, right? That's very important. Regular eating and sleeping schedules. So rather than completely changing up from your previous lifestyle, try to keep to some sort of regiment. That's going to keep them on schedule. Avoid late day appointments or care routines. So if you have an option of getting them into the doctor's office or an appointment mid-morning or versus late afternoon, then take advantage of those opportunities. Kind of like, your schedule of opportunity to do things maybe is 9 to 2 versus most of us run through at 5 o'clock. Limit caffeine and sugar to morning hours. Prevent over and underestimation. So try not to get them too excited about something or burst their bubble with something. Big news, right? Rocking chair to calm, and then early dinner and light snack before bed. Light from bed to bathroom, so that when they get up, they're not confused. Well, what time is it, right? I mean, Michigan, we have less, 8 hours of less sunlight in the winter than we do in the summer. So a lot of people get confused. Is it, 7 in the morning or is it 2 in the morning? And when they wake up, they think it's time to get going for the day, put on their clothes, and they're ready to go at 2 in the morning. That happens so often. Familiar items into unfamiliar places. So when we move people that have a dementia into a memory care unit, and I'm going to clarify now that not all people with dementia move into memory care. Typically, it's those that are exhibiting a wandering behavior or maybe some aggression towards others, lashing out, that sort of thing. That's what a memory care unit's for, not for anybody diagnosed with dementia. I think, if I was to estimate a guess, I would say probably 80% of people suffering from dementias that are in communities or home are either in assisted living or some sort of private duty home care. So that's my goal, is to debunk some things today here for you guys. Hopefully I'm doing that. All right, so if you are a caregiver for somebody with dementia, it's most important that you don't forget about you, because your declining health as a result of caring for somebody that has a dementia is not going to help both of you. And so there's a number of things that I might recommend here, but lives are often shortened considerably due to stress. They have suppressed immune systems, increased rates of infectious illness, and major depression disorders, because they have a new level of responsibilities, new financial burdens. I think of my mother. I lost my dad in November of last year, He had, I think they never diagnosed anything more than a mild cognitive impairment. And he probably would have had full-blown Alzheimer's because his mother did, but we never went that far. But she was gradually sort of taken over 3 years. She now had these new responsibilities for managing things that she had no idea. And of course, I live less than a mile from her, so I was brought into that and was able to help her. But I think it's important that that couples understand what each other is doing in their lives to keep the family together, because without that person could be a major significant hole, and things can get out of control pretty fast. And then round the clock care needs, right? So those are sort of the 3 things that come to my mind when I think about being a spouse or a primary caregiver to somebody with dementia, and how do you handle those things. So the first thing I'd like to recommend, and I recommend this to all of my clients that are going through this with a spouse or another family member, caregiver support groups are just a tremendous help. I mean, we have a tendency to think about, Alcoholics Anonymous when we think about support groups and that sort of thing. But this is, you're going to walk in the room and everybody's going to be going through some level of what you're going through. Some are going to have been there for quite some time and they're going to have great tips. Others are going to lean on you for your new tips. And then you're going to have, typically there's a clinical specialist that moderates that. So they're going to be the ones that give the most advice, and kind of, if they hear some advice that's not good advice, they're going to correct that person. But they are so valuable. And of course, the Alzheimer's Association has some, most of theirs I found are online, but you can go, like the Hauenstein Neuroscience Center at Trinity Health has an amazing group. And in fact, they're putting together a caregiver, not just specifically for dementia, but they're putting a caregiver series together there that's going to be very structured over several weeks. So you kind of come out with your credentialing or whatever at the end, but that can be very useful. So that's top of my list. And then share the burdens with others. And I'm thinking of, family-centered care really is sort of the best outcome. If you have a family that lives nearby, everybody should have a part in it. It's not just up to the spouse to take care of that other spouse. It is a family, it should be a family thing. And if it's done properly, it can only make your family stronger. And I think, probably the third one on here would just be, don't be shy about getting advice from others. I mean, I talk to people every week that are dealing with the dementia and give advice, and I don't know it all. I certainly don't. And that's why we have, physicians, specialists that can help to fill those gaps. We have, the Alzheimer's Association. We have a variety of groups within West Michigan here that can be leaned on for this sort of thing. So look out there and find out what resources you have in your market. I'm going to pivot just a little bit, obviously same subject, but we're going to steer a little bit away from dementia, the dementia topic, and just talk about the senior living spectrum. Because, when I started this talk, I mentioned that we all remember skilled nursing from 30, 40 years ago, and that may be in our minds, unless we visited somebody recently at a community, that may be what our interpretation of senior living is. It is such a much more advanced, vast selection of a la carte that you could just imagine. And this is really what I'm talking about here is the senior living spectrum, but you've also got all these other ancillary services that, for example, if you want to stay in your home, there's all kinds of services, modifying the home, advice, all kinds of things that come with, Meals on Wheels, that type of thing, to keep you in your house as long as we possibly can. So I didn't put that on this, but this sort of gives you a snapshot. And if you're okay at reading graphs, from the bottom up is going to increase in cost. And then from left to right is the level of care and supervision that's required, least to most. And so I'll kind of start with the sort of the biggest piece, which is the, you'll see it there at the top, continuing care retirement communities. We call them, we abbreviate it as CCRC model. I mentioned Hauenstein earlier. They are a CCRC model, meaning that they have independent living, they have assisted living, they have memory care, so a secured unit for dementia, advanced dementia, and they have skilled nursing, which would be more like a hospital level of care right on campus. And then, of course, they've got ancillary services to support that too, like rehabilitation, right? So there's several of those in West Michigan, namely in Grand Rapids. You have Clark, you have Porter Hills, you got Holland Home, Beacon Hill. That's pretty much, well, then you've got Covenant Living out in Lake Michigan between us and you. So that's sort of, if I think in most cases, if people that I'm working with, if they told me they had, money isn't an issue, if they've got a couple $1 million in the bank, maybe even, $700,000-800,000 in the bank, they can probably look at the continuing care retirement community model. Now, unfortunately, and we're finding more and more, people are not having the resources that they used to. People aren't saving as much. Then you have to start sort of working your way towards the bottom left, right? So I just talked within the continuum care, I talked about the spectrum. Independent living, you can find an independent living community out there. And the interesting thing is, if you get into one early enough, you can find a way to stay there. Because a lot of the independents these days, and keep it in mind, independent is typically, I can drive yet, they've got a place to put my car, I come and go as I see fit, but they provide me meals, they provide me, cleaning of my apartment, they take care of all of those sort of what are basic needs. Plus, there's a lot of activity that goes on there. So if I'm a social person, it's a great place to be. 55 years and older, hard to believe. But you can find people that are 55 and you find them in their 60s, 70s on up. But today, what is different about independent living versus maybe 10, 20 years ago, there are third-party or even in some cases their own care departments. And so I'm going to give you an example. I found or I was referred to a customer that had 24-hour care needs, husband and wife. They were basically both living in the living room of a 2-story home. They had sort of migrated to the living room, brought in a hospital bed, and they were spending over $20,000 a month on private duty home care. And he in particular was resistant to even looking at a senior living community because he kept telling me, I don't want to go live in a cigar box. And I said, well, you're basically living in your living room, which actually the space here is much smaller than an apartment. Plus you have the whole community that you can roam with your walker and be safe, right? Somebody's going to be there checking on you all the time. So they both moved in, and that was a year and a half ago, and they have rebounded and they're just loving their new life. So life can be better in a senior living community. And then assisted living is sort of that next level up on the spectrum. You tend to find communities that have assisted living and memory care in two different areas of the building. And so the idea is that maybe you go in assisted living where you need help with activities of daily living, like bathing, dressing, toileting, eating, you know, any combination of those things, and maybe a mild dementia as well. And then if you get to the point where, again, if you're lashing out at others or you're walking out the front door and don't know where you are, they have a secured unit and you'd have to move from assisted living into memory care. So that's pretty much what that looks like. And just about any of these scenarios I've talked about, you see respite care in the green there. You can live in just about any of these communities with respite care. So if you had an injury, maybe fell and broke your hip, and going home is no longer an option, but you do know that once your hip heals, you want to get back home, respite care is the option, right? So you can be pampered for, you know, a month or 2 months and then go back home. So the other thing financially I should talk about on these is all of those that are below the continuous care retirement community are month-to-month rentals. Usually a 30 or 60-day notice is all they need, okay? Whereas with the continuing care retirement community, those are typically, I say typically, a buy-in type of situation with a benevolent fund, right? So you buy in at a certain level, you pay very little per month, and then you're guaranteed to be able to stay there through end of life. Most of them have a foundation that's associated with their organization to do that. So any questions on this? Because I know this one can be quite confusing to people. Or have I just confused you and you don't even know what question to ask? I didn't talk about skilled nursing very much, the nursing home aspect. So let's just talk about pay portion of this. So if you're on Medicare or Medicaid, it's going to be covered in skilled nursing. It is not going to be covered anything to the left of skilled nursing. Okay, so if you need to pay for independent, assisted, memory care, that is all private pay. One exception to that, or maybe two exceptions, could be where funding comes from to help you make up a difference. The first one would be if you were active military during a wartime, you may be eligible for aid and attendance. And then the second one is if you qualify financially, you may be eligible for Medicaid waiver, but the bar is set extremely low, $2,000 in assets or less. Now, there are things that we can do to kind of get you there, but and that's where organizations like Oasis Senior Advisors or Area Agency on Aging can be very beneficial to help steer you on that.
Brian, a question we received, where do you find the most availability from these various options? Some people are looking at a year plus in wait times to get in. Is that consistent across the board, or is that specific levels of care that require that wait time?
So I've been doing this for 5 years now, and I've seen ebb and flow in all of it. 5 years ago, most of the continuing care retirement communities, now keep in mind, most people are entering in at the independent stage of that continuum. And those were book solid for years. That has changed a bit over the years. Coming through COVID, coming out of COVID, I would say that's not as prevalent right now, but that's where it's important, I think, to reach out to an organization like ours, because we end up doing all of that research for you to figure out what availabilities are out there. Do you need it today? Do you need it a year from now? Is it going to match your budget, et cetera, et cetera? Does that help answer that question?
Yes, and a quick follow-up, if I may. As the baby boomer generation ages or hits retirement age, do you see this becoming a more severe challenge, or are constructions being elevated to bring up and meet the demand?
I would say yes to both of those, because I do see a lot more businesses getting involved. In fact, in Grand Rapids, in the last year, I would say probably 6 or 7 properties have been acquired by organizations outside the state that are sort of buying up all these businesses and developing, nationwide solutions. The major problem, I think, that I'm seeing today, and I've seen this just in 5 years, is that fewer and fewer people are retiring or getting to the age where they need these services with a nest egg. They don't have the resources set aside to pay for these things, because I think the assumption that a lot of them are making is that, well, my government's going to take care of me. Medicare, Medicaid's going to cover me, because that's kind of the way we've been moving as a society, and that's not the case. So if someone is eligible, I mentioned earlier, the bar is set pretty low. You have to make 2742 a month or less, and have 2,000 less in assets to qualify for that. Plus, that obviously a physical need. I'm finding an awful lot of people just don't. They're not going to be able to make up the difference, right? Because if it's $6,500, which is not astronomical for assisted living care on a monthly basis, they've got to come up with whatever the difference is in Medicaid waiver that they're getting. If their pension's only $1,000 and they're getting, assistance another couple $1,000s from Medicaid waiver, they still have, a few $1,000s to make up. So that's my biggest concern, is not the space, although it is growing, but it's the financial wherewithal to be able to move into one of these communities and private pay for yourself.
Thank you. No additional questions in the chat at this time.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about some of those costs. I touched on a little bit there, but what does it look like today? And this one particularly is Genworth for Grand Rapids, but it's not gonna differ much between here and Holland. Adult day on a national scale is about $1,700 a month, and then in Grand Rapids, that's a little over $2,200. Assisted living, $4,500 a month annual or nationally, and $4,800 in Grand Rapids. And I think some of that has to do with quality of care. I remember, I'm part of a national franchise, so I talk to franchisees all over the country, but I think, and I often tell my clients that West Michigan has way more to offer than just about any other market I've seen in the nation. We innovative programs like Senior Neighbors, and just a whole host of organizations that jump in to help where other markets don't have that. Home care, this, keep in mind, this is just 44 hours per week, so it's certainly not around the clock care. 4,500 nationally and 5,500 here in Grand Rapids. The thing about home care, if you're thinking about private duty, what you have to remember is they typically have minimums, so 2 to 3 hours per visit. And then sometimes they even have, per week minimum hours. But the cost of that's going to be anywhere from about $30 to $40 an hour, right? So if you're going to get involved with that, just keep in mind that it's going to be, over $100 a week on the low end. And like I said, with this couple I had taken care of, they were spending over $20,000 a month. So I don't know how long you could afford that, but I probably get maybe a couple months out of them. Nursing home, single occupancy room for one person, 9,000 nationally and over 10,000 here. A very expensive proposition, but again, this is where, Medicaid and Medicare. So when people contact me and they say, Brian, I've got $3,000 a month, Social Security, pension combined. And keep in mind that threshold for Medicaid waiver was $2,742, so they've exceeded that. But they have no assets; they're under the 2,000 limit. What can I do for them? It's the biggest struggle of what I do is trying to help people in that kind of situation. I've got a client like this right now that needs my help. Mother and father, same situation. An option is a skilled nursing home. It's not what we want for ourselves. It's not what we want for our loved ones, but that is the option. And isn't it weird that that's the most expensive option? And we end up, our tax dollars pay for that. I'm going to show you what it looks like in Grand Rapids so you just kind of understand. And, Grand Rapids is obviously a much larger population than Holland, but this is sort of the gauntlet of what people have to try and navigate when they want to go seek out a senior living community. How do you even start to look? Well, you call us. That's what you do, because we're going to spend about a half hour to 45 minutes with you, and we're going to find out what your likes, dislikes, needs, and what you can afford. And then all of our data kind of figures out what are the best communities to look at. And then we're going to set up a tour with you and take you out on the tour and show you around. So like I said, we do have a franchise in the Spring Lake market that handles Lakeshore. So if you're ever interested in just even doing some homework, why not have I didn't mention this, we're a free service. So why not have somebody, an expert, provide a free service and help you navigate that? People often struggle with, why not just live at home and kind of eke it out and figure out how to exist at home versus going into a senior living community, an independent living. These are all extremely valid reasons. I just visited a client of mine last week. He had placed a month and a half ago, and I always do this. I stop in to see how they're doing, and I tried like heck to get any negative feedback from this guy. I was like, because that only helps the community to improve their quality of service, and he loved everything about it. I mean, if you think about where he was, his wife had passed some time ago, and he was living at home by himself, and all his kids, very loving family, really, really nice family. But one lives up in Stanwood, one lives in Chicago. They're all over the country. They can't come and visit him. They can't check on him. They can't really do what needs to be done, and he has no social life because he doesn't drive. So this is just an incredible experience for him, because he's now getting out. They take the bus and they go eat lunch somewhere, or they go to the Meyer Gardens or whatever it is, they're staying active, and that just means the world to him. So, all these things: social life, transportation, dining, housekeeping, emergency. If most have some sort of pull cord, or these days are more like pendants or something on your wrist that you can push a button and somebody's going to be there in an instant to make sure that you're taken care of. Physical exercise, they've always got activities. Cardio drumming is a huge thing, music and pounding away on these drums. And then they do give you more independence. It's hard to believe. That's probably the number one reason why people don't want to go into a senior living community, because they want their independence. But the reality is it gives you more independence. Because especially if you're not driving, you have no way to get out, you now have a way. So, all right, so I'm just going to talk a minute here about finding your way to support. Most people these days, and I might not be speaking to the right crowd, but certainly the generation younger than you, the cohort younger, would say that they do their research online. And I'm probably guilty of that in a lot of cases. This morning I was looking up something. I could not find the support I needed through an online search. Note that, when you're looking online, it's not always trustworthy. There's a lot of companies out there that are just trying to get as many eyeballs as possible, and they don't really provide the service that you need or want. They're inefficient, and a lot of times that what you're pulling up there isn't in your market. They don't know you. They don't know what Holland is as a community. They don't know West Michigan. And I would think that you would want, if you were selling your home, you certainly wouldn't want somebody out in the state of Washington selling your home. This should be no different. I think of this as like a physician. If you're going to look for a physician, you're probably going to talk to your friends and family, and or maybe another doctor about who is a good primary care physician that you want to change to. I'm guessing that everybody does that. So don't do that when you're looking for senior living advice. You want local, and there's a few organizations like ours in market, and there is a spectrum too of that, but certainly use local. And I'm finishing almost exactly on time. I planned 15 minutes for questions, Q&A, and I think we have 13. So contact information is right here. Feel free to reach out to me if you are in need of any services in Grand Rapids. Tina Butler has a team along in Spring Lake, so you can certainly reach out to her at that number. More than likely you'll work with Emily Duff. How about any other questions? I covered an awful lot of material.
Yes, thank you, Brian. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourselves right now and ask those directly of Brian, or you may type them into the chat window and I am happy to relay them on your behalf.
And it can be anything. It could be personal. It could be about my grandfather, or friends, or how I got to know Richard, or
Brian, I see Judy Parr has unmuted herself. So Judy, why don't you kick us off?
Yes, I have a question. You mentioned that at some point that you offer free services. I'm wondering, those free services are maybe just for the first interview or something like that. You've got to be able to sustain your organization somehow. Do you get most of your money through government, Medicaid, Medicare, or how does your organization get its income?
Yeah, excellent question, Judy. And I thank you for asking that, because it's one that probably maybe 1 out of 10 of my clients will ask, and it's legitimate, right? I'm not a nonprofit. I am a for-profit organization. We are able to provide our free service because when a family or an individual decides that they're going to move into a community, that community will compensate us. We have agreements with those communities across Grand Rapids and of course across the Lakeshore for the Lakeshore team that says they have to pay us X amount percentage wise of what we've brought to them. And those communities will be happy to do it because they know that we're screening, right? So we're not bringing them somebody that's not financially qualified or even, you know, physically qualified for that community, because they go through an awful lot of those. They know that when we walk in the door and we've scheduled that tour, this family is probably a really good fit. We just need to make sure they're comfortable with it at that point.
So in some ways, you're like a realtor.
I would say, yeah, I've seen that comparison before. And it's good just from the standpoint of senior living community placement, but we do so much more. You know, I refer people to physicians. Last week I was trying to help keep a person in their home. They live out in a rural community and didn't have the money to move. And so I introduced them to an organization called Mom's Meals Nourish Care that can ship them free meals twice a week. And then also referred them to, you know, an organization that can come in and modify their home to make it safe to live there. So we have our feelers out into literally over 100 organizations in our markets and nationally to give people advice. And that's all free. We're just growing our knowledge base so that we can pass that along as an additional benefit to those we serve.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you, Judy. I would next like to go to Jackie Coonan, who has unmuted herself. Jackie, go ahead.
Thanks, Ian. Brian, what suggestion do you have for helping a family member out of state? They are in a suburb of Cincinnati. Are there like organizations as yourself that we could pass on to them to start with?
Yeah, there are like organizations, and then there are also Oasis Senior Advisors franchisees in Cincinnati. I have 3 of them in Cincinnati, and they're very good. Yep.
So if I go online, I can find under Oasis.
You can, after this, if you want to give me a call, I can connect you to them.
Okay.
Or you could do a search. Yeah, either way.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Would you put your number up again?
Yeah, absolutely. Good idea. Let's see. Go here, screen share. All right. Can you see that?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Make another call here for any outstanding questions. You see Brian's contact information on your screen now. You also see his colleague Tina Butler's information on there as well. But last call, if anyone would like to either type in a question in the chat window or come off mute and ask the question yourself. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to ask Dr. Swanson to close us out. Dr. Swanson, if you can unmute yourself, you should be able to speak there.
I want to thank Brian. I think you provided a tremendous amount of information. I think you helped clarify a lot of the information for many of us. As you know, this organization is more of a senior organization, so this is more pertinent to us than some of the other places. And I just want to thank you very much. I learned a lot myself today. I think I know what to do when I get a little bit older or need it. So thank you. I hope the rest of you all have learned something. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I thank Brian for his time and his expertise.
And my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Great audience.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Monday afternoon. We hope to see you in the classroom or on the virtual classroom here again soon. This class has been recorded and will be available for you to view on the HASP YouTube page at the end of the summer term. Wishing you all a great afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.